Hello, 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 and good evening. Díomh go léir, fáilte gach duine an seo, three drams. Mr. John O'Donovan, the man behind the curtain. How are you doing? Good evening.
I'm good, Matt. Thanks for the couple Fercullen. All good here. Thanks for hosting once again.
Not a problem at all. To everyone out there watching in, because I can see a lot of first-timers coming through on the comments. My name is Matt. I am from potstill.com, your Irish Whiskey Trove website. And sitting beside me here is John O'Donovan, the man, the mastermind behind irishmalts.com and 3drams.com, and the person who's really putting this all together. So while I'll be your host for this evening, really big thanks to John O'Donovan for not only putting this all together, but for creating such a platform to promote and showcase Irish whiskey around the world. So John, from me at least, thank you very much, and great to see you.
No problem. Thanks, Matt. You too. So happy New Year. If it's your first time with us tonight in 3 Drams, we'd like to see some comments, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. Let us know where you're at and what you're drinking. I just wanted to jump on, Matt, very quickly at the start to introduce the 3 guests tonight and to mention the special offer email which will go out after this episode. First up, we have got Noel Sweeney. He is with Powerscourt Distillery, and he will be talking us through Fercullen's 8-year-old offering, and we're looking forward to that. I've met Noel once or twice in Distillery. If anybody hasn't been up there, I'd recommend getting up there when it is safe to do so. Number 2, we have the founder of Walsh Whiskey, an iconic brand now, I think, with the Irishman and Riders Tears. And we have a whopper of a whiskey with the Irishman Cask Strength 2020. Third up is Mihal Walsh at Bowen Distillery, and a whiskey that was launched recently, single grain, the Mosaic Marsala cask, and we are excited about tasting that one. Have you met the guys before, Matt? Are you excited about it?
I am excited about it. We talked about this off air. This is an incredibly exciting lineup of guests, not just of whiskies, but I think we're going to have a very exciting time talking about age statement blends, cask strength, again, blends, but of a different variety. And then we're into the world of single grain. So I think, especially for people who are tuning in for the first time tonight, and I can see, this is always the thing I love about 3 Drams. There's so many live streams I've been on. There's never as many people engaging on YouTube like there is on 3 Drams. I'm loving seeing this. And there are so many people with such huge comments coming through, and a lot of people saying hello from all over the world as well. So it's great to see. I think we're going to have some fun tonight, John.
Yeah, I mean, we have nearly 200 people across all the platforms watching live now. Just to touch on one question I saw pop up about an issue that some people didn't receive the email last month. So we had a slight error with our database, which we rectified. So we're sending out the email after this one. There's actually some brilliant offers on there. So if you didn't receive it last month, you're going to get it this month. Yeah.
And John, before you go, if people do enjoy their whiskies tonight and are looking to purchase them, and perhaps they're not a part of the tasting packs and won't get the emails, they're able to find all these whiskies on irishmalts.com. That is correct, and be delivered straight to their door.
Right. Yeah, and there'll be links with the offers back to irishmalts.com. Yeah, this is incredible. I'm so happy to see it. 200 people live here, so I'm wasting their time now. I want to say one last thing. There's a lot of rivalry going on in the background. I can see the 3 guys in the background here, and I've seen them have a bit of banter already. I can see them smiling right now. So let us know what you think of their whiskies. Now, we don't just put any whiskey into this tasting kit. We genuinely try to get some top quality whiskies, and make sure you comment on what you liked and maybe what you didn't like. I mean, it's good for people to hear. So, Matt, saying that, I think I'm going to check out and join the audience.
That's right, John. We'll talk to you a little bit later on. So enjoy watching from the background. And to everyone at home, again, welcome. I'm delighted to have so many people who are joining from, I see people coming in right now from Germany, the Netherlands. We have someone in the comments from Brazil. Absolutely fantastic. First timers, long timers, people who know lots about Irish whiskey and not a lot about Irish whiskey. Everyone is welcome here. This is a fantastic place to learn about Irish whiskey, and also just to learn about whiskey in general, and also to have a little bit of fun on a Thursday evening in every month as we go along. As John mentioned, we're going to have 3 guests tonight. We have about 15 minutes to go through. We're going to talk a little bit about themselves and their brand, and then the whiskey we're trying. But as we go along, any questions you have, anything that piques your interest, do ask in the comments. If we have the ability to at the time, we're going to jump into all of your questions, and otherwise we'll be able to jump back to them after the fact and answer in the comments as they go along. So we are jumping straight in to the first whiskey this evening. This whiskey is presented by Mr. Noel Sweeney, Master Distiller at Powerscourt Distillery, a person that I am delighted to have met and sat down and done a lovely and fantastic podcast with, who will be talking us through the Fercullen 8-year-old blended whiskey, which is whiskey number 1 in your tasting pack. So, Noel, I guess, welcome to the show, sir. How are you doing?
I'm the finest. Thank you very much, Pat and Matt. It's great to be on, and thanks also to irishmalts.com for inviting us.
Oh, no, well, I mean, listen, thank you for your time. I know it's funny in the world of social media, and especially in modern day whiskey consuming, people just assume master distillers have all the time in the world to jump on live streams. I know you've probably been sitting in the distillery in Wicklow all day, doing a full day's work, and then you've come straight onto this after a bit of tea or supper. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. But this to me is better than work. This is an evening of enjoyment and pleasure, and to spread the word about Irish whiskey, and in particular our Fercullen brands. I'm not at the distillery on a daily basis, of course, with COVID and everything else. The amount of travel to the distillery now is we kind of cut back as much as we can. So. But hopefully after all of this madness, we'll be fully back up open with the visitor centre and everything in a short wee while, hopefully in May or June perhaps.
Exactly. Before we jump into all that, I will say to anybody who's tasting along at home, and in this month's episode, we actually have a bumper number of people who have different tasting packs, this tasting pack going to different places around the world. I think John mentioned before the show, there's 1,600 people around the world that got this tasting pack, which is a phenomenal number for any whiskey community, but for Irish whiskey in general. This is what it looks like. If you're lucky enough to have one of these lovely plinths, if you sign up to the 12-month subscription, this is what it looks like. If you don't, it's fine. You'll still have your lovely tasting box just like this before I knock over my tasting book. We are jumping straight into whiskey number 1 here, as you see here, which is our lovely Fercullen 8-year-old blended whiskey. I've already poured it into my glass. Exactly. There you go. Now, this is actually probably a good segue. Sorry, I'm going to try to put this up here because this is the lovely 3 Drams tasting book for anyone who has it at home as well. So you can keep your notes in here, but I did knock it over. This is probably a very good segue. No, because I usually start with loads of different questions. But the first thing is, I have your lovely Fercullen premium blend without an age statement. And I had a little birdie told me before I came on the show that these are actually one and the same, but that you decided to call out the age statement in the whiskies. Is that correct, or have I got the information slightly askew?
Slightly askew. When we did the first blending, the whiskey wasn't 8-year-old.
Gotcha.
The malt was, but not the grain. We had 2012 grain, and that was the age that we used in the premium blend. So our second large bottling was at 8-year-old. So we decided that we would go up the ladder and put the 8-year-old statement on the bottle at that stage. But the whiskies are very similar. Again, as I said, there was only a few months in the age category side of things that we have to comply with. And there was another reason as well. You think you know everything when you're in the business as long as I do, but sometimes you get caught out, and it's actually not permissible under the GI, which came out 2 years ago, to have the word premium in front of the word blend. So that was another reason why we had to do a change on the label. Look, these things happen. So it was fortuitous in some respects that we were able to do the change and put in the 8-year-old. But those are the couple of reasons as to why we changed over the label.
And that's very fair. If you are going to change the label, at least it changed in the better of the consumer in that way, that we now have a fantastic 8-year-old age statement on the label, which in itself very unusual in the world of any whiskies to have an age statemented blend. Can you tell us a little bit more about the breakdown of the blend itself?
Well, the blend consists of malt and grain, and we're looking at whiskies that were matured in a bourbon cask. The grain was recast in 2017, having been in not so much a fresh bourbon cask at the time, so we recast it into fresh casks, and that gave it an extra little bit of a lift with the vanilla and the sweetness in the grain. The malt was in bourbon, I think, yes, from day one. And again, we just selected a complementary volume and percentage malt in the blend based on the flavor and taste of the whiskey overall. So the blend is 8-year-old. It's got a little bit more complexity probably than others. And I think it's a little bit more weighty as well than something on the non-age statement side of blend whiskey.
Absolutely. And for those who are joining us for the first time, we're talking about blended whiskey. We're taking two different styles of whiskey made in Ireland, being in this case a single malt and a single grain, which are made single malt in pot stills and single grain in column stills, and blending them together. And the fact that there's an 8-year-old on the label, there's the youngest whiskey in the blend has to be a minimum of 8 years old. So just to give this all the couple of questions coming through there as well. Actually, I see a fantastic question in from Andrew Kennedy. This is jumping a little bit ahead, but they said there's you did a great 13-year-old expression with James Fox Cigar Shop. Is there any chance of releasing a special release with Irish malts? I'm putting yourself and John O'Donovan on the spot here, but I can see him laughing in the background. So
I always take the approach that if there's a demand for something, we'll do our best to fulfill it. And and single bottlings of those kind of things are, again, if you're going to do 350 bottles for one particular outlet, you want to be sure that they're going to move it. And there's a bit of a collaboration on both sides to get that done. I'm sure that the commercial people will be able to talk to irishmalts.com and see what we can come up with. But it's all about, having availability and all of that. And I don't think that would be a problem.
Of course. So for the people out there that don't know you, as a distillery, Powerscourt in the grounds of Powerscourt House and Gardens. It is fantastic. Actually, a beautiful combination of old world stonemasonry in the reception building, and then the new distillery in the back. And are you focusing on pot still or single malt, or what's the kind of the guise of the distillery going forward?
Well, initially we started with malt production. And 2018, we started distilling. Our first whiskey will be 3-year-old this August. And in 2019, we did some pot still. And that was our first venture into a pot still. And last year, we have done a little bit of pot still with rye. And that has turned out really, really interesting. And we can't wait for that to come out in a few years' time. And also because of, when you're a single distillery, you kind of have to try a few different things. Otherwise, you run out of ingredients or different toys to play with in my game. But so in just finished this month a run of peated malt. And again, we're very, very, very pleased with that. So over the coming year, we'll probably do a lot more of triple distilled malt. We will certainly do something of the region of 15 or maybe 20% of our total production in pot still. And we'll decide then later on whether we'll have some rye or peat later in the year. But that's where we're at the moment. So looking to have a couple of different expressions available on simply spirit side of things.
Absolutely fantastic. So I see a lot of people in the comments it's always the way, the first whiskey of the evening, people can't help themselves getting into the glass. Is there a possibility, and I hope you appreciate this now, I have my little Powerscourt glass here now. Can you talk us through what we should be expecting from a whiskey like this?
Absolutely. I mean, because again, there's a high concentration of bourbon in this whiskey, so you expect to have that kind of vanilla sweetness. The grain and malt deliver you a certain amount of citrusness and honey, a little bit of kind of marmalade-y flavors. Certainly on the nose, it's soft and gentle. The grain that we made has always had that kind of butterscotch feel to it, or even buttery at times. Some people would say toffee, and that's coming across in the nose. I think when you get into the taste side of it, then
let's see, sláinte.
Sláinte, is it? Yeah, it's nice and clean, refreshing, sweet, citrusy, and all of those kind of things are going on. Again, you wait for the certain amount of oakiness, and the grain and malt are kind of happy together. You can taste the maltiness there as well towards the end, and then the finish just lingers on a little bit until you says, "Man, I'll have another one of them." So that's the kind of thing you would expect. I mean, how do you feel about it?
Well, as I say, I love your tasting notes in this, because especially in the palate, you have that warm wood kind of oak flavor coming through, but with that toffee and almost a salted toffee coming through as well, which is fantastic. A little bit of apple going on in the background of the palate as well, but I like, as you mentioned, that it has that Moorish character as you poured more into your glass. That was if ever I've seen a marketing technique, that was one.
I can't help myself there,
And I am cognizant of time, because we have so many things to get through this evening. There's a couple of questions coming through here, but they are all related to the blending of the whiskies here. When you're blending these malt and grains together, what are you looking for in terms of flavor profile? Because of the Fercullen whiskies, you were given kind of a blank canvas. So what do you aim towards, or how does that process work for you in that aspect?
I guess on the first releases of Fercullen that we brought out, this whiskey was produced by myself when I was in Cooley Distillery, both the malt and the grains. So and a lot of that whiskey was available to other distilleries, and they've bottled something similar. But generally speaking, most of them would have put their own touch on the whiskey, and that's fine. And in some cases, been very, very exceptionally good. So I wanted to bring out the whiskey more or less as it was intended initially, straight bourbon matured. No messing with it. This is the base material, but this is the best combination of both. So when we're doing blends, we're always looking, I think, at the volume side to start with, so which is the grain. So you take your samples of grain, you're looking to see that it's clean and sweet and all the rest of it. Then you look at your what's available on the malt side, and you want to blend them in such a way that both come through, that the product is balanced. It's not reeking of malt. It's not too spicy on grain or whatever, and you get a balance, and you can taste both aspects of the two different whiskies. So our grain, people would have possibly tasted our 10-year-old, or even that 13-year-old that you mentioned from Fox's, and is that kind of sweet butteriness to it. But again, it can be slightly thin, but because of the age, you're getting a bit of oak in there as well. So when you come then to add your malt adds a different dimension. But the trick in any blend is to get the best out of both and to balance the whiskey. So balance is everything when you're dealing with a blended whiskey. And even then, going into things like the 5 elements that we did, you can bring in different characters then to give you a combination of flavors. And again, it's balancing them in different proportions to get that whole the nuances. You can get the sweetness of the sherry. You can have the kind of rum flavors of oak, the bourbon oak, and that's the art of blending. And the last thing in blending is, of course, you have to be able to make money out of it. So you can only make stuff that you have in your warehouse as well. And that limits people in some respects, but it's to try and get the best out of what you have as well is the most important thing after getting your tastes right.
Absolutely. And I love your explanation of trying to balance that malt and grain flavor coming through, because often a lot of times we hear people speak about the cask influence they want to get through, but that's actually a very of the hundreds and thousands of people explaining blends in my vicinity or to me. I think that was a fantastic explanation, particularly for people out there who are learning for the first time what whiskies are in the Irish sphere. We had a very interesting question, which I think would be helpful to mention. I am just cognizant of time, so possibly one of the last questions for you, Noel, if you don't mind answering along. Francis Fleming asked, he said, you mentioned peated malt, but Francis is wondering, what does that mean?
In the earliest production of whiskey, and I mean going back hundreds of years, people used malted barley as the source of enzymes to convert starch to sugar. And that was a well-known technology in brewing as well. But in the production of spirits and whiskey, that malt sometimes needed to be stored for longer periods of time, because you had your harvest in the spring. You want to produce malt, you can't use it straight away, so you wanted to store it. And the best way of storing any grain is to dry it. And malt comes out of a malting process very wet. And in drying it, they used the local fuel, which was peat. So even back in the day, in Ireland, a lot of the malted spirit was actually peated. So the way that they dry it in a kiln, the kiln is like a big tank with holes in the bottom, and they light a fire under it, and the heat from the fire goes through the kiln and out the top along with all the moisture. And they bring down the moisture content from around about 15 or even higher when you're dealing with green malt or fresh malt, right down to about 4.5%. And at 4.5% moisture, or 5%, you can store that grain for several months, and it brings you through the whole winter production process. But in more modern times, then they changed from using peat, and it was the peat that was used as a fuel. The flavor of the peat was captured by the malt, and when it went into production, then in distillation, the same flavor carries through right through distilling and into maturation and into the whiskey that you can taste. So that's how peated malt is produced. The reason that other people went for non-peated product was that they used different sources of heat to dry the malt. And people used oil for some time, way back in the 30s and 40s. And then they discovered that oil actually gave them off a carcinogen in the malt, and that can't have been detected. So whiskies that were produced prior to the 1960s could have a high concentration. Now, these things are very low, really, in comparison to what would be a serious dose of. But if you're drinking bottles every night, it might be a problem. But so then they started to use indirect heat to dry the malt, and that's how it's done nowadays, where they use steam through a heat exchanger, bring dry air through the kiln and remove the moisture. And that's what normal malt now is. It's no flavor with it at all.
Exactly. So that's where we're getting a clean, crisp flavor, whereas the peated malt, you're getting that kind of smoky, vegetal, almost, sometimes, depending on what type of peat you're using, medicinal characteristics.
I even describe it sometimes a little bit like if you ever see a telegraph pole, you can get that kind of creosote kind of expression in the whiskey.
Absolutely. And then there's a fantastic question from Owen J. Deneen in as well. Where can we purchase Fercullen? Well, the obvious answer from all of this is, of course, at irishmalts.com, because I believe they have your full range, including the 5 elements. Your 18-year-old is up there as well.
Yep. And I would recommend that if you wanted to get the 5 elements, don't wait about it. It's a limited edition, 1,500. And I know that we had sold about well over 900 coming up to Christmas, and we only launched it there in November. So,
well, absolutely fantastic. Again, no, I very much appreciate your time. I know that this is not your average day to day, so I appreciate you taking time out of your evening at 8 o'clock and now 8:30 to come on and talk to us all about the Fercullen 8-year-old blended whiskey. If people, again, want to find it for sale, we're looking at irishmalts.com, amongst other retailers. But of course, Irish Malts will deliver right to your door. It's the middle of a pandemic. You don't need to go anywhere. And if you can remind us again, Fercullen 8-year-old blended whiskey, a combination of grain and malt in bourbon cask. That is correct?
100%. And thank you again. And it was a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much, Noel. I much appreciated. And thank you to everyone out there who is watching along at home. We are having, I suppose, a fantastic time talking through different whiskies here with some fantastic questions coming through. One question I saw coming through about the book and the plinth. These are essentially add-on extras depending on your 3 Drams subscription. If you take the likes of a yearly subscription, there's different elements you get along with the packaging. Some people asked as well, how does the flavor wheels inside the booklets work? This is very much for your own enjoyment. Whiskey is subjective. I cannot tell you what you're tasting because I will have no idea ever what it is going on in your mouth or in your head. So that's why we use things like these flavor wheels here, where you can map yourself, balance and gauge different parts, whether it be linger, balance, body, sweet, smoky, tannic, woody, toffee, malty, along the whole flavor spectrum. And this is just a reference back as you go along your Irish whiskey journey. So a great tool in itself. Next, though, I am delighted to be introducing the next guest of the evening, Mr. Bernard Walsh, founder of Walsh Whiskey. And we're going to be talking all about the Irishman Cask Strength 2020 Single Malt Edition. So welcome to the show, Bernard. Thank you so much for being here.
Matt, great to be here. And thanks to you and the O'Donovan brothers. And also, it was fascinating to listen to Noel there. And he was very unashamed. But I'm going to do now, Noel, take that. But it was great listening to Noel. He's let's say one of the great heroes in our industry, and I've sure learned a lot from him over the years.
Absolutely, and one of the things I really love about 3 Drams is the guests come on sequentially, and the people at home can't see, but I can see the people sitting backstage. And what's great is that most guests stay on even past their time, and I can see Noel. This is hilarious. I can see it, and it's funny to me, but he just gave a little thumbs up when I said that. So he's staying along to watch your segment and Mihal afterwards. But we are on expression number 2, which is for anyone who's sitting at home with the tasting packs. And I say anyone at home, an absolute insane amount of people sitting at home. We have the Irishman Cask Strength Single Malt Edition 2020. Which is at this point a mainstay of the Irishman collection. It is very much sought after every year. Could you give us a little bit of a background into, I suppose, first of all, what is the Irishman, and then what is your yearly Cask Strength release?
Yeah, I suppose this goes back a number of years when we came into business in 1999. I can tell you, nobody really was knocking down the doors looking for Irish whiskey, Matt. In the early years, I remember visiting North America, US, doing a research and talking to people, and the key Irish blends, and hats off to them. Jameson, Tullamore, Bushmills did a wonderful job in building a reputation for Irish whiskey out there. But people saying, listen, we've got our whiskey, we're fine. We've got Jameson, we've got Baileys, we've got whatever Hussar vodka. We need nothing else. But I suppose what drew me into it was just the love of the liquid and the interest in it. But there was no real demand back in '99, so we were, I suppose in a way flying by the seat of our pants and just discovering a lot. But from the Irishman's point of view, which we actually launched in 2006, it was all about going back in time to see, well, what made Irish whiskey so great, and can we help to, I suppose, broaden out Irish whiskey. The taste profile for Irish whiskey for me was quite narrow, and really it was to try and broaden that out and bring something new to the category. So the Irishman was all about that. And I love my single pot still whiskies, and just as much as I like malts. But we discovered in our research, and I worked and I got great assistance from the guys at Irish Distillers at the time, a guy called Gil Jeffers, and his team were wonderful. Looking at, Irish whiskey back in the 1800s, and, single pot, as we know now, but, pot still whiskey and malt whiskies were blended, and the taste was viewed to be a wow. So let's research this, let's look into this. And we did quite a body of work, but that was the project for the Irishman, really to bring something new, something different. So it was in 2006, the first blend of pot and malt available commercially on the shelves. So we're really proud of that. I was influenced hugely by what was happening in the US at the time. Bourbon was just starting to take off. I love bourbon, and big fans of things like Stranahan's or Blanton's. Blanton's did some wonderful whiskeys in the early 2000s, and that all fed into my thinking. And bourbon, you'll find the bourbon barrel a mainstay at Walsh. Yes, we work and mature our whiskies in other casks, but look at the Irishman 12-year-old. You can't beat a good bourbon barrel. It's just wonderful. I was just astounded in 2006 that there was no cask strength Irish whiskey available in my lifetime. So let's say I'm close to 50, maybe a bit over it, but in my lifetime, there has been no cask strength Irish whiskey available commercially. Maybe some odds and sods or whatever else, but commercially there was nothing available. And what I saw over in Kentucky and with some of these new distillers bringing out some wonderful cask strength whiskies, just really blowing open the taste profile of bourbon at that time. Saying, well, why can't we do something similar with Irish? And that was our wee task. Now, as we started out, we didn't have access to maybe a lot of stock. So we thought, well, if we could do this once a year as let's call it our vintage or Grand Cru, that would really, tick the box for us and myself in particular. So that's where we started out.
So when you're talking about the Irishman itself, we're talking about like the Fercullen, it falls into the category of blended whiskey. But unlike the Fercullen, you're not using grain and malt. We're in the category of pot still and malt. Is that correct?
That's correct, Matt. Now, the Irishman range goes from that signature of ours, that pot and malt blend, all the way through to a full malt range that we have developed over time. But the signature is this pot malt, and that's what we've become known for, really. And I love listening to Noel, and he was talking about the balance is everything. And pot still is a wow whiskey, but it can be overpowering. There's a lot of spice involved, in peppery spice notes, and so getting that balance right with the malt was key, really.
And how is it explaining to the world at large about a blended whiskey that doesn't have the usual components? You're talking about premium, single pot still whiskey and the usual, premium single malt, but together in a bottle together. You're not talking about what people usually think of a blend. Is that a challenge or a delight in itself?
Listen, it's a delight for sure, and especially when you taste them. We're gonna taste them, but I really do remember in 2006 when we introduced the Irishman and the pot and the malt. There were many comments around, less on social media, but more on written emails to me saying, you can't, this is not a blend. This is, how can you do this, et cetera, et cetera. We are taking Rolls Royce ingredients, the pot still, the malt, are absolutely beautiful on their own, but together it's a wow, and there's a lovely balance between them. And Matt, you would have heard us kind of or use a phrase every so often that the champagne of Irish whiskey, and it's a wonderful taste, and it's something that we really want to share with everybody. But unfortunately, the vintage release we only do once a year.
Well, why not a perfect moment to drop into the glass? Can you talk us through what we should expect on the nose, and also just before we drop in, what ABV are we looking at as well, just to give people at home a little bit of a heads up before they deep dive into the glass?
Okay, and I'm just conscious that people online at the moment, or maybe afterwards, people downloading here. This is 55.2%, so it's pretty hot. There's going to be a lot of heat in this, and I think Noel mentioned about water in the preamble earlier on, but don't be afraid to use a drop of water. I'm not to start out with, and I would always encourage everybody here tuned in tonight maybe to try it as it was intended by the distiller, by the blender, to try it as it was intended, whether it's my cask strength or Noel to somebody else's. And so I have a wee drop of water ready for later on, but I'm going to try this. And I've had mine in the glass since before we started. I think 5 minutes in the glass is good. Let it breathe a little bit. Let some of those alcohol notes dissipate. And now, this has been open here for 5-10 minutes, and there's a lovely creamy note coming through. And listen, I know my whiskey. This whiskey I've had many times, so this is sort of leading me on here. But there's a creamy note, but there's a finesse to it. You'll get the hint of that sort of vanilla, that bourbon note, but not overbearing either. So I don't want to give you a bourbon, but I do want some of those lovely vanilla tones, even sort of that little rich butterscotch note to come through. I also like to sometimes just keep it in my hand, that sort of hand holding the whiskey. I don't know, when I was growing up as a young kid, going into the local shop, it was a bar on one side of the shop, and you get your bread on the other side, and just looking in at the old guys, and they'd be there nursing the whiskey for what seemed like an age, but it was probably only 5 or 10 minutes. But those guys knew what they were doing. Just it releases the lovely aromas from the dram, from the whiskey. So sláinte to all our friends out there. Matt?
Sláinte.
I talked about heat earlier on. When you're drinking a cask strength, you are going to get that heat. But with this at 55, this is just it's not overpowering, not overbearing, and I would just hold it if you can. It's just a lovely feel as that heat moves on. There's a spiciness at the very beginning, which is the pot still spice coming through. You'll feel that on the lips up front, but then just watch that, let it move on, and now a lovely creamy coating, lovely creamy texture.
There's a fantastic tropical fruit note in here as well, which I'm really enjoying from the bourbon cask, which is a rarity to pull out a bourbon cask as well without any kind of fancy exotic cask regimen going in. This is very enjoyable, and as a lot of people have said, it doesn't taste like 55 too on the palate.
No, it doesn't taste like 55. There's no burn. There's a beautiful mouthfeel, and I just love the way this goes on. But there's a finesse to it. So while there's that creamy note through the middle of it, there's a finesse. And I'm actually now, let's say, 20 seconds into, and I'm going to say a nuttiness, but it's almost like a tobacco leaf, if you can get that. It's a nuttiness to it at the end. Now, I do like to experiment a lot here, and just a wee drop of water, and I really mean it. And here's my little straw, so nothing fancy. So I just got my little dropper here, and
Well, you do your straw, and I'm going to do the whiskey on the hand trick here to burn off some of the alcohol, and just we jokingly used to call it the Irish aftershave, but to burn off some of the alcohol and smell what's in behind it. You get some of those amazing esters on the hand as well.
You get the esters in the hand, and you also, it's that we talked about the wood, the vanilla, the oak. You really get that coming through as well. Okay, here we go with the wee drop of water. Now, that has made a difference. So I'm getting, it's less of the creamy note, and there is more of the pot still spice coming through now. So that, but yeah.
And what percentage of the bottle are we looking at for malt and pot still?
So for the Irishman, it is 70% malt, 30 pot.
And then is Riders Tears the opposite of that?
Yeah, well, Riders Tears, we've really dialed up the pot. So if we were to, give our children two different sort of purposes in life, for the Irishman, it's majoring on that malt, and for Riders Tears on the pot still. And it's a nice little segue for the Riders Tears that we have some really interesting developments on that later this year. So from a pot still point of view, I would love to get you to taste it later this year.
So just to look at what the Riders, this is actually the old Riders Tears branding, because you've just come out with a phenomenal new repack, which, if you couldn't tell from my reaction, I'm a really big fan of. But this is actually the Japanese Mizunara cask, a particular favorite of mine, which is the sister brand to the Irishman, if that's correct to say.
It is correct, and I suppose I mentioned about the bourbon movement in the early thousands, and while for me the Irishman was all about tradition, Riders Tears was really the rebel in my portfolio, and I wanted to do something very different and disruptive, which I suppose that's Riders Tears has helped me express that.
Well, for me, actually, when I got into my whiskey journey about 8-9 years ago, the Irishman Founders Reserve was one of the first whiskies I really took a hold of, and to this day, even in the Irishman portfolio, the Founders Reserve still holds a very strong place in my heart, and I'm delighted to see the cask strength coming through every year. And how many bottles do you release per year? And if we're looking on irishmalts.com, what is the recommended retail price if you have it on the top of the head?
Okay. First, the Irishman Founders Reserve, Matt, you're spot on. Pound for pound, it is, for me, it is just the best whiskey that's out there. It's a great value, and we always try to do that. We never overcharge, and you can check any of our whiskeys. I remember when our 17-year-old won Best Irish Whiskey 2 years ago, we were not criticized, but say, well, why is it so cheap? It was very affordable, just over 100 quid. And of course, some retailers managed to pop that up a little bit, but great. We always try to give a little bit more in the bottle, and that's what we do with Founders Reserve, with the cask strength. So every year, I can't say that we have 3,000 bottles every year or 2,000 bottles every year. It varies. So for 2020, 3,500 bottles. I can tell you that this is the second last release of the Irishman cask strength as we know it. As you see there, we have one more coming out this year in 21, and then all things change in 22. We have some more development. So for let's say collectors out there, this is one to get. Now, if there are any collectors listening, the 2009, 2008 was our first. The 2009 didn't go to plan, so I wasn't particularly happy with the cask that we blended to give us that vintage. So there is no 2009.
Well, I mean, that's also very interesting for people to know. Do you happen to have an idea of what the recommended retail price is on this for the likes of Irish malts in the domestic Irish market?
Approximately €140
for 55% alcohol.
Yeah.
Look, perfect. So I very much appreciated all of your information, Bernard, and I know that you're from the looks of it, I don't know if it's your house that's decorated so on point, or if you've stayed in the office in Carlo for a couple of extra hours. But for those out there that don't know Bernard, I am delighted to be able to chat to you. And the same with Noel, and I can see everyone in the background very much enjoying this chat. The comments are going crazy at the moment. People are loving this whiskey. Thank you for taking us. I suppose for Noel bringing us through the blended whiskey, and then Bernard for you bringing us through the difference that can be conceived of blended whiskey using different types of grains. And it's fantastic to have the two of you one after another. And I thank as well John O'Donovan for sculpting the tasting this way, to have you guys side by side. And I think this has been a fantastic tasting. So thank you so much, and feel free to watch along in the back.
Absolutely, Matt. Listen, it's been a pleasure, and Noel, myself, and the others in the Irish whiskey industry, this is exactly what we want, and it's opportunities to talk to you and your audience. So while COVID's been very challenging for everybody, what you're doing here with 3 Drams, what the O'Donovan brothers have done is just absolutely, it's a lifesaver for us all. So I'm having a little lock in here, and I'm going to listen on to Michael Walsh, and we're not related, but Michael, best of luck here.
I can see he's giving you a little glass up in the background there. So Bernard, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you a little bit later on.
Cheers, Matt. Bye.
Thank you so much. So to everyone who's watching along, please let us know in the comments what you're thinking. We're seeing so many people talking. We've got Brendan Byrne saying it's a cracking whiskey. We've got Alan Jarrett saying it's absolutely fantastic stuff. We've got people from Germany tuning in. We've got people from France, the Netherlands, again, Brazil we've got coming in. So please let us know what you're thinking of the whiskeys as we're going along. But we are careering towards our third whiskey of the evening, which is dram number 3 from Boann Distillery, which is the Whistler Mosaic Marsala finish single grain. And I am delighted to be joined by Michael Walsh, the head distiller from Boann Distillery, who is a first time, like everyone else on the show tonight, guest on 3 Drams. So welcome to the show, Michael. Mihal Renat, how are you doing, sir?
Very good, very good. Delighted to be part of such a brilliant tasting, and you didn't half set it up with 2 industry powerhouses, 2 great inspirations of mine, in the distilling side with Noel leading the way for many a year, and Bernard's fantastic contribution to whiskey as well, and on the blending, probably one of the people as well, a pioneer on the blending side of things. 2 great men and 2 good big inspirations, I must say, on a personal level.
So we've got Noel, who's a Hall of Famer, Hall of Fame distiller, and then we've Bernard, who was one of the early visionaries and pioneers of the Irish whiskey renaissance. Do you think you're going to be able to follow along easy enough after that?
I was going to say, what are you going to call me? Rookie. No.
I believe you still hold the title of Ireland's youngest head distiller.
Well, if I could achieve half as much as the 2 guys have achieved so far in their careers, I'll do very well for myself.
I see Sharon McKeever said in the comments, is he old enough to drink? I'd like to think she's talking about me.
Yeah.
Right. We are here to talk to you about dram number 3, which we see right here. I don't need the focus to go on the 3 because we all know what the number 3 is. This is the Whistler Mosaic Marsala cask finish. This is the single grain, and the first single grain from the Whistler and the Cooney family from Boann Distillery. Interestingly, you're the head distiller up in Boann Distillery, which is a pot distillation distillery. which means you don't make grain. So this must have been on the blending side of the role for you. What was it like, kind of working on that spirit side of cask maturation and blending?
Yeah, it was very exciting. Like I'm like you touched on, I'm the youngest head distiller, but I've been working as a head distiller for this is my 7th year, and blending as well along that course. But it had been with pot still and single malt was my experience, and even as you touched on now, distilling. We're focused largely on distilling pot still whiskey at Boann. So to get my hands on single grain was a new venture for me, but something that I was very excited to do. We happened to have, when I joined the team at Boann, they obviously had a nice portfolio of casks maturing in the background, and these casks in question was about a 5-year-old grain. It's sourced from Middleton, beautiful distillate. Something I hadn't worked with previously, but I have plenty experience. Most blends, bar what Bernard does with his pot still and single malt blends, would have a large proportion of the whiskey would be made up of grain whiskey, but it's very rarely released on its own, for one reason or the other. But it was something that I was keen to do, and the guys in the distillery were also keen. Because it is an exceptional distillate side. It's beautiful. It's a little more delicate and more, I suppose, delicate and elegant distillate style compared to your maybe bigger, bolder pot stills or single malts. But a beautiful distillate style all the same.
So you're saying that this grain started off, it was 5 years in bourbon, and then you kind of got your hands on it to work with it. What was the process of, we're talking about it's beautifully designed bottle, Mosaic, Marsala, single grain. What was the process of figuring out the process of putting it into Marsala? Why was that the choice? Did you happen to like Sicily, or what was the idea?
I was trying to weasel my way into a trip to source the casks, but no, not necessarily. But the distilled style, like I said, is quite delicate and elegant on its own. Noel made the point it can be quite thin on its own, and that's why sometimes a tool to add body or add more in the form of flavor profile to the distillate is to add a little bit of single malt, maybe 10% or 20% of the blends, in the case of the Fercullen, made up of a single malt or equally single pot still. But I was more interested in going down the avenue of layering on extra flavor profile from a cask type. Now you do have to be very careful with it because it's so delicate. A distillate style, it had matured for 5 years in bourbon, which meant it was very well rounded, nice distillate with a lot of creamy, buttery vanilla notes that you would expect from this, not only the style but the contribution of the bourbon casks. And then it's about what we can add on without overpowering it. If we were to use something, if the oak or the wood type was too powerful or too tannic, it doesn't necessarily play into the hands too well with the grain, or equally something too big or bold in contrast. So it was trying to find something that complemented the flavor profiles, the sweet and elegant flavor profiles, and added a little bit of a layer on top of that. So that's where the Marsala was the choice. Marsala is a fortified wine, like you said, from the Isle of Sicily. It's gorgeous style. It's similar. If people aren't familiar with Marsala, they may be more familiar with it's a cousin of sherry or port. They're fortified wines, and that's that influence of the Marsala casks for the year and a half or so that this was matured in the Marsala cask, added on a beautiful, like almost like a citrus orange peel kind of a layer onto all of those beautiful vanilla and buttery notes of the grain itself.
Well, while you're saying that, let's do a little toast and maybe we can taste along and see some of those flavors that you're talking about. So let's say sláinte McCarge, sláinte now. So on the nose, I'm getting a lot of that kind of that background of the creaminess. You're maybe kind of lime, citrus. What should I be looking for in the nose here?
Well, that's what I would agree with those notes. It is a nice, like a lime citrus peel, like a zestiness to it, particularly on the nose. You get that comes through on the palate as well, but it comes through on the palate with a little bit more of like those creamier tasting notes, a little bit of hazelnut, a little bit of chocolate. It's a gorgeous sipping whiskey. It is not quite a cask strength like Bernard's, but it is at 46, a slightly higher ABV than some other whiskies. So it is something that you can add just a tiny, like Bernard demonstrated. It can open up with adding just a little bit of water to it, but doesn't necessarily need it. This is a beautiful sipping whiskey, as I found out through Christmas. It's a whiskey you can just sit down and pass away in evening, no problem at all, just sipping away. I can't wait until the 1 week of the year where we get to have a barbecue in Ireland and sit out in a sunny evening and just sip on this. It's a lovely whiskey, particularly for someone maybe who is new to tasting whiskies, wants something a little bit more complex, but it's still very approachable. I love pot still whiskies. I love their single malts, but they can be a bit bold and a bit overpowering for someone who's just familiarizing themselves or getting or just taking their first steps into Irish whiskey. So a nice elegant single grain with an extra layer of complexity added in from a nice but not too overpowering cask type like Marsala. It's the first whiskey. We have a beautiful range of whiskies at Boann in the Whistler range. I'm very proud of, but this is the one that I will happily put in front of somebody who's not, like, when they say I'm not a whiskey drinker, I wouldn't really like to have this and have a sip on it. It's a crowd pleaser. It's a crowd pleaser whiskey of all of the range.
I see a person in the comments has asked if you were to place this as a time as to when to drink whiskies, as a digestif or an aperitif. You're presented with the Whistler Marsala cask in your barbecue fantasy. Where would you place this in your evening?
Well, see, there's different whiskies for different occasions. As far as there's even distillates like Noel touched on earlier, like peated whiskies and stuff like that that wouldn't necessarily be to my palate, but I occasionally have, and would say usually not when I'm in the company of anybody else, not because I'm hiding embarrassed and I'm drinking peated whiskey or anything like that. It's more so that it can be kind of that. It's an unusual. He was talking about Creosote from Telephone Poles, medicinal. It's more of a wrestling match of trying to understand these flavor profiles and consumes you into, and often you make funny faces and try to figure out what it all. Whereas this is a whiskey where, like, on a lazy sunny evening where you're at an event like that with friends, or if we can ever meet with people again, where you're just engrossed in conversation and want something to sip along with, and just. It's a beautiful sipping whiskey like that. If we ever get a warm sunny evening again, or like I had over Christmas, I went through more bottles than I would like to admit to, just sitting around with family and just sipping and chatting, and that it doesn't necessarily grab your attention, but it's just a beautiful, soft, elegant whiskey.
You mentioned making funny faces and whatnot. I could see as you were talking that both Noel and Bernard were enjoying your descriptions. Repeated whiskies in there as well. I am delighted that both have stayed along. It's always great to see the guests join in, because each whiskey this evening has been so different. You know, when we're looking at this Whistler, you're looking at a whiskey that's in the kind of 44.95, 45 euro price point, with such a very different flavor profile to Bernard's cask strength Irishman, and again such a different profile to Noel's Fercullen 8-year-old. And I think that's such a great thing about the 3 Drams series, that we're able to try such a wide variance of flavors within the same tasting, and get a nice cross section of Irish whiskey. If you were one person has asked in the background here now, and a little bit earlier on, and I've kept it in the back of my head, so apologies that I haven't got straight to the question. But Michael, there's a number of people who are joining for the first time. Can you give a very top level synopsis of what the difference between pot distilled whiskies rather than pot still? So pot distilled whiskies being single malts and single pot stills, and grain whiskies, which we're trying right now, are, because we've heard a lot about the pot distilled and the grain whiskies already without really explaining what they are. Could you give us a quick synopsis of that?
Okay, it's single grain, single malt, and single pot still are confusing to begin with, because the names are don't necessarily lead you down the way that they're different. The main difference between single malt and single pot still compared to single grain is the device that's used to distill them. So if any of your listeners have seen a picture of a distillery or the inners of the distillery, most likely the photos you've seen will contain big bulbous copper pots, because they're beautiful to look at and quite ornate. That's what's used to make single malt and single pot still. We have a set of stills in Boann, whereas a single grain is distilled in what's referred to as a column still, sometimes a continuous still, or a coffee still historically, but they're not as pretty to look at. It's quite an industrial device. It's a more modern device, and single grain can use more than one grain, although single grain would lead you to think otherwise. But it distills the alcohol, or distills the spirit, to a higher concentration. So your single malts, triple distilled single malts would be in the high 70s or 80s, where your double distilled might be around the 70 mark. Single or triple distilled might be about 80% alcohol. Your single grains would maybe be distilled up to around the 90% alcohol, and alcohol that leaves less space for things like congeners and esters. Now, that's a word many of the newcomers to Irish whiskey will never have heard of. Congeners and esters are basically the flavor molecules within the whiskey. So it makes a far cleaner spirit, because not all of these congeners and esters are good. But it tapers back on the flavor profile, and makes it cleaner. Like I said, cleaner, more elegant distillate, compared to something that's bigger and bolder, generally speaking, coming from a pot still.
So when you're dealing with the grain spirit, you're looking at a nice cask maturation going forward with that cleaner flavor. You're influencing it more that way, and then when you're getting to the pot distillation, would you say it's more fair that there's a lot more of that grain flavor coming through alongside of the cask maturation?
Probably, and in the sense that's why you have the single malt would certainly have a lot more of that. Single malt or single pot still distilled in those pots will have a bigger, more robust flavor profile coming through from the raw ingredient, and can stand up to the cask type, different cask types more. It's better able to stand up to cask types. So you have to be more careful with the single grain, because it's that little bit softer. There's less of a carry through of the flavor profile. If you're not too careful, you can just completely overpower it and mask any of those elegant, soft, like creamy butterscotch tasting or flavor notes that come through from the grain and are beautiful in a final whiskey, like is evident in this whiskey I have in front of me.
Yeah, absolutely. And leave it to me to ask a pot distiller all about grain distillation. So I appreciate it. I should have fixed that question to Noel earlier on. But I appreciate you.
I know, I'm happy. No,
but yeah, so this is the newest release from you guys at Bowen Distillery and the Whistler. You find on Irish malts for approximately $44.95 around that area. In the domestic market, obviously prices fluctuate with different duties across Europe and, of course, the rest of the world. It's approximately 5 years in bourbon with about 15 months in the Marsala cask. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, about 5.5 years, about a year and a half. So yeah, just shy of 7 years between the two maturations, between the bourbon and the Marsala.
Absolutely wonderful. Michael, thank you. And as I said to each of the people beforehand, I know that you have literally been in the distillery today from probably about 6 a.m. Until the end of your shift, and you've got home, walked the dog, cooked a bit of food for yourself, and instead of relaxing, you've come on here to talk to us and been our fantastic third guest for the evening. So I very much appreciate your time and thank you.
An absolute pleasure to be on with such esteemed guests and be in there to be held in their company on something like this is an honor. Be on with 3 Drams. I hope the people at home enjoyed the Whistler and the other whiskies and the evening as much as I have. And yeah, thanks to the guys at Irish Malts as well. They do great stuff. They have, like you mentioned, they're very supportive of us and all of our brands. But yeah, thanks again for a great evening.
Not a problem at all. Thank you for your time, Michael. So, folks, I am delighted to be rounding up this evening. Not to forget that you can get all of these whiskies on irishmalts.com. You've got the Fercullen 8-year-old blend is approximately around that €44 price mark. You have the Whistler Marsala Mosaic single grain for approximately the €45 price mark. And then you have the Irishman 2020 cask strength for around the €140 price mark, up at that lovely and fantastic and delicious 55.2% alcohol by volume. For everyone that is taking part in the tasting this evening as a structured tasting with the guys from 3 Drams, and you have your sample kits, and we're all signed up, which is 1,600 of you. Absolutely amazing numbers. It is skyrocketing every month. You will be getting a discount code into your email if you fancy picking up any of these whiskies. If you don't get the email this month, check your junk, because the guys from Irish Malts have made sure that every single person who's received a pack is getting an email as well. It has been a fantastic tasting. I want to say a huge thank you to the O'Donovan brothers from irishmalts.com, which is also the sister company of 3drams.com, which is why we're here. We have the lovely little t-shirt here. And to Mr. Noel Sweeney, Bernard Walsh, and Mihal Brannock, Michael Walsh, a very big thank you to all of you, and to everyone watching at home, whether it's your first time or your 100th time tasting these whiskies. I very much appreciate it. I see Bernard is holding up his glass in his sláinte, Noel as well, Michael following suit. So we all say a very big thank you, good night. And if you've any questions specifically, make sure you tag Irish Malts in the questions section, and they'll be able to get back to you with any of the answers that we weren't able to get to here. To everyone out in the whiskey world, thank you so much. I am Pot Stilled Matt, and for this evening, I'm going to say a very big thank you and good night.